This is an informal gathering after the service where we just get together to have some fellowship and continue conversations. Everyone is welcome to join us. Visitors are especially welcome to join us. Between the service and lunch bunch, we will share coffee and conversation in our gathering place just outside the sanctuary. We would like to especially welcome our visitors this morning. We're very happy you've chosen to include this place in your spiritual journey. You should have been handed a welcome packet when you arrived. If you did not, we're sorry for the oversight. Please feel free to ask for one as you exit. That welcome kit contains a yellow card like the one in the pew in front of you. Please feel free to fill that out, and if you do, we'll put you on our email list where you will get we promise only 2 emails a week. Keep you in touch with what's going on here at Emerson. And welcome, we're delighted you're here. Someone from our coming of age group would like to speak with us now.
Good morning. I am Charles Ritz, and I'm at the lectern today to tell you about a survey that may or may not have been handed out to you already. It's a short survey about your beliefs on the divine, God, goddess, or unknowable energy present in the universe. To take the survey, simply circle up to 3 statements that you agree with most. Keep in mind that this survey is anonymous, so please do not put your name. This is for statistical reasons only. This is Grant. He will be collecting your responses at the end of the service. And this is Reese. He will be crunching the numbers on the data, which will be displayed 2 weeks from now. Thanks in advance for your participation.
This is Reverend Ed's last Sunday off. He will be back with us next week. Our guest today is Catherine Vance. Catherine is a candidate for UU ministry, serving her internship at the UU Fellowship of Galveston. She's enrolled in the Masters of Divinity program at Iliff School of Theology in Denver. She's also a chaplain at UTMB Hospital in Clear Lake. She holds an MFA from Washington University in St. Louis, and her novel, The Mountains Under Her Feet, was published by Balance of Seven Press in 2023. And now, please enjoy our prelude as we formally begin our service. And now we transition into our sacred time together, a time of reverence, a time of attention, a time of intention. I invite you to join us in this time marked by the lighting of our chalice flame. I would like to invite David Nielsen to come forward and light our chalice flame in the sanctuary. and I invite those of you at home to light a candle where you are to join us in spirit. Today, and all of July, we hear the words from Albert Schweitzer. Ludwig Philipp Albert Schweitzer, who lived from 1875 to 1965, was a theologian, organist, musicologist, writer, humanitarian, philosopher, a physician, and Lutheran minister. Please join me in reading these words together as they appear on your screen. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within. Instead of our standard welcome, Catherine will lead us today in one of her own.
Okay, so trigger alert warning, this will take 30 seconds, but I'm going to ask you, if you would, to just take a moment to notice one another, because we're going to do a Zulu greeting in which people make each other real by seeing each other. So it goes like this. Sawubona means I see you, and the response is Sikona, I'm here. So we're going to do it in pairs. So just turn to your neighbor and one of you say, Sawubona, I see you, and the other one say, Sikona, I'm here. Okay. Now switch and do it the other way. Sawubona, Sikona. Okay. Good, good. And if you're watching online, we welcome you as well. And Sawubona, we see you.
It is important that we acknowledge that our history is a shared and often harmful one. Our congregation's buildings are situated on the home of the Karankawa and Atakapa peoples, who were here at least 2,000 years before European settlers arrived and very nearly brought about their end. May we recognize, uplift, and support Indigenous voices and communities in our work as a congregation.
Well, my reading fits right in with that land acknowledgement, because each time we are gathered, we hear words from one of the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism. And so today the words are from Alex Perez from a newspaper article entitled, We Are Still Here. It's by Aaron Rodgers from the Texas Tribune. So 48-year-old Alex Perez, who grew up in Galveston, said his grandmother was reluctant to talk about her indigenous heritage, even though she maintained that their family had always resided on the coast of Texas. His family, like so many other indigenous families, adopted Mexican culture and lost much of their Karankawa language and customs. There's a whole lot of people in the Americas that have no idea or don't have the stories of who they are, Alex says. In my grandparents' generation and before, it was frowned upon to even admit that you were Native. There was residual left from being ashamed of being Native. You were expected to forget about that. But the realization that his ancestors were Karankawa came like a precious memory lost to cruelty and time, a piece that was always there, it just was temporarily forgotten. So he did research, he asked questions, he convinced his grandmother and other family members to get DNA tests. And that showed that indeed their ancestors were indigenous to the Texas coast. And he got involved with other indigenous communities to learn. Knowing my family's history and what my grandmother would tell me, it was like this revelation, Perez said. I went through this emotional period of being angry and reliving some of the history. Well, he compares his people's story to that of the Texas red wolf, which scientists believe to have disappeared from the wild. But 3 years ago, what they thought were to be coyotes on Galveston Island were found to be descendants of red wolves, having integrated with the coyotes as people poisoned or shot them and their territory shrank down. So that mirrors my experience, Perez said. His parents' and grandparents' generation would identify as anything but Karankawa, but he now brings his young daughter to Karankawa ceremonies. The tradition is an identity that we can give back to our kids, he said. Our kids have to go to school and exist in this world, and they should exist in knowing their truth instead of falling under a subcategory that was invented for them. It's so beautiful to live in that way because I didn't have that, he added. I have a 10,000-year-old history, and it survives. It exists today.
Please join us now in singing hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses. Each time we gather, we ask your help in fulfilling this church's mission. The success of this church and of the principles we support is made possible by the work of our members and friends and by your financial support. We honor that support by striving to live the mission of this place fully and wholeheartedly. Here at Emerson, this collection does not go to funding our church, which is funded through our pledges of financial support. This collection each week goes to fund the work of important partners of Emerson who, in our opinion, live out our Unitarian Universalist values in our community and in the world beyond. The act of giving our financial support is both a transformative spiritual act and one way we live our values. 75% of today's offering will go to our July recipient, Disability Rights Texas. The mission of Disability Rights Texas is to help people in Texas who live with disabilities to understand and exercise their rights under the law, ensuring their full and equal participation in society. The remaining 25% of today's offering will go to Interfaith Ministries Meals on Wheels, which provides thousands of meals every day to Houston's homebound seniors. You can go to our webpage for giving online, put cash or check in our offering basket, or mail a check to the church.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We're daughters of dust and sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We're lovers of life and builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We're makers of peace and wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one. For each child.
So we've arrived at the part of the service now that is intended for reflection and meditation. So if you're comfortable, just put a hand on your heart and one on your belly and breathe with me. And this is a reading from Learning to be White by UU minister and theologian Thandeka. Beginning in the 1600s, by means of race laws, colonial Virginia's ruling class systematically gave their blessing to lower-class whites, whom they nevertheless considered the scruff and scum of England, and who now, free in the colonies after their indentured servitude, were thought of as the rabble of Virginia. Well, what prompted the members of the ruling elite to racially elevate persons they despised? English descriptions of the poor were often identical with the descriptions of blacks expressed in colonies dependent upon slave labor, even to the extent of intimating the subhumanity of both black and white. The white poor were the vile and brutish sort of mankind. The blacks were a brutish kind of people. In the eyes of wealthy Englishmen, the poor bore many of the marks of an alien race. The passage of race laws in early Virginia functioned to put a wall between poor whites and blacks and protected masters and their slave-produced wealth from both the lower-class whites and slaves. So poor whites acquired new political and social advantage by means of these laws, along with the legislated right to feel superior to all non-whites. In the earliest days of America, before these laws, there had been a natural camaraderie between persons of different colors who found common cause because of similar social and economic status. The laws put an end to any interracial advance toward common class interests and gave way to an antipathy which suited the wealthy white politician, the land, and the factory owners very well. White racism was, from the start, a vehicle for classism. Its primary goal was to denigrate a class. It was intended to defend Virginia's class structure and further the subjugation of all the poor of all racial colors. Blessed be. Well, thank you all very much for having me back again. It's always a joy to be here in this space. Well, my daughter went to Ghana some years ago, and she brought back this beautiful piece of woven tapestry. So I'm wearing it today to celebrate the Akan tribe of Ghana, which gave the world the concept of Sankofa. Most African religions don't have sacred texts, but they do have symbols and oral histories. And so the mythical Sankofa bird, which you see on the cover of your order of service, it's holding an egg in its mouth while turning its head to look back. And it symbolizes that we must go forward by retrieving strength and truth from the past. And the word is made up of 3 parts. So san means to return and get, and ko means to go, and fa means to look and to seek. And so it translates as, it's not wrong to fetch what is at risk of being lost. So this is an interesting idea to consider, because so often we're told that we should just keep our eyes forward. Why, some ask, do we want to constantly be stirring up discords and discontents from the past? Isn't it better, people say sometimes, to just give ourselves a clean slate for the new day? Well, in some ways, yes, but as we create the future, it's helpful to bring the learnings of the past into the present moment and either discard them or build upon what our ancestors have given us. And so, as you can imagine, the Sankofa symbol is a very powerful one in the African American community. And it invokes the remembrance of their centuries of struggle, of determination, and the will to just continue building a just and beautiful society. And they keep their history alive through storytelling, through music, through dance, as well as through honoring their leaders, through community building and celebration, even through the food or the naming of their children. And they're constantly re-embedding the truth of who they are, who they have been, bringing that forward into their current lives. Well, the Sankofa process, that process of radical self-examination and the gathering of wisdom, is something that we can all benefit from as individuals and as communities. So we must all ask, what is it that we're bringing forward that is of worth? What is the thing that we should save? What are we currently nurturing now that is laying the groundwork for the future? Because we are essentially the past of that future. So Sankofa is more than just a recalling of events. It's the recognition that it's impossible for us to be disconnected from the past. And to that end, it's really important that we actually know what that past is that we're talking about. Well, civil rights activist, professor, and scholar Kwame Jeffries says that we all suffer for the poor history that we've been taught. We all suffer for the poor history that we've been taught. Sometimes we were told wrong things in school. Sometimes we weren't told anything at all. Sometimes we thought we knew the story, but the truth is never fixed, and so you have to stay open to the revision of the narrative. So many of us are old enough to remember that when the white friendly story of Columbus discovering America in 1492, right, was the final word on how our country got started. Not the real story. But happily, a Sankofa process has enabled us to bring that around to where we now celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day. We still have far to go, but I'm so proud of you guys here at Emerson because you do acknowledge that you are on land originally occupied by tribes, including the Atakapa and the Karankawa. But many people in the Houston area couldn't tell you those things. They could not tell you about these tribes. And our dismissal or ignoring of this is harmful. It's as illustrated by the story I told about Alex Perez, because when you don't know who you are, you don't even know how to make sense of your family stories and the feelings in your own body sometimes. It can be a gift to have identity restored. So looking back helps us sometimes to grieve. It helps us to recover and understand ourselves, and it helps us to find new rituals and intercessions for what lies ahead. So in Alex's case, what he does is he now works with the indigenous people of the Coastal Bend, and it's a nonprofit which works to minimize corporate exploitation and damage to the beaches and the waterways where his ancestors have lived for 10,000 years. And so that's what he did with his Sankofa life. When we live Sankofa in our personal lives, it often does start as a quest for family knowledge, but has outcomes that resonate in the community. Sankofa helps us to notice how the past was painful, how it was incomplete, and how we are tasked to take our egg of wisdom and go ahead into alignment with what theologian and philosopher Charles Eisenstein calls the most beautiful life that our heart knows is possible. Sankofa is why survivors of child abuse grow up to be social workers and therapists. It's why you become a writer, an artist, or a guitar player when you saw that that was a seed that was in your family, but your dad and your mom never had a chance to really bring that forward. So it's why you maybe became a chef, to honor the recipes and foods of your culture. You find ways to honor and find strength in your family and in your culture. And so, first of all, Sankofa does apply to each of us as individuals. Well, I've been on a sort of a Sankofa quest myself. Unlike Alex Perez, I always knew where I came from. I didn't have to have a DNA test to know that my people were from the mountains of East Tennessee and western North Carolina, and maybe you can hear that in my voice a little bit, and from Scotland and Ireland before that. But I did know that I had this spirit of keeping on through adversity, and I figured I got that from them. But I still had questions about myself. Why, when I knew what I was capable of, didn't I achieve more? Why was I mild-mannered and sometimes a people pleaser? Why was I uncomfortable with making more than just enough money sometimes? And so I went into the past, and I went looking for my ancestors. And I went to the graveyards out in the Christmas tree farms in the Blue Ridge, and I went to the archives, and I drank coffee with my oldest living relatives, and I found my great-grandmothers. And there's a picture I have of one when she's married at 16, and then another one when she's about 45. These are the only two pictures of her that exist. And that last picture, when she's 45, she's the mother of 12 children. And in both of those photographs, she has this sad, downturned mouth, and she's wearing the same skimpy little piece of lace around her neck. And such was the level of deprivation and scarcity that I sort of internalized in parts of my life. Well, another great-grandmother I found was a farmer's wife, and at least she did something. She ran away from home. But for her trouble, she was pursued, and she was captured and placed in an insane asylum where she died in a fire. Because in those days, you just didn't go all eat, pray, love and get away with it. Women who did those kinds of things were crazy, were considered crazy. And so I said, thank you, grandmothers. I know you tried your best, but no, the buck stops right here. I thank you and I honor you, but with every fiber of my being, I'm going to start to be a spiritual game changer for this family. And that's one of the reasons why I stand before you today. So how does Sankofa land with you in your individual lives? What were the points of pain, or what were the points of strength given by your family tree so that you could find the silver lining and do something remarkable? But Sankofa is about so much more, because we have to ask ourselves, how does it land with us as a community as we do the work of opening our hearts and minds and doors and practices to all? What does history tell us is our legacy, and how are we going to use that to inform the way that we continue to build beloved community, not only in our country, but in our denomination? So it's essential that we look back to capture our history, to see our blind spots, our exclusions, at times our misplaced self-satisfaction, because who is more aware than Unitarian Universalists? Who is more acceptant and forward-thinking about social justice than we are, we think? Right? When we think about who we want to be as a church, as a nation, in the way that we welcome others, in the way that we offer our message, going forward, what do we really find? Are we honestly looking for a way to own our mistakes as we go forward, as we glance back? Are we looking for an example to see what white privilege tells us about our responsibility, tells us how to use the past and make the needed changes? But again, as Kwame Jeffries said, we all suffer for the poor history that we've been taught. Because remember the Thandeka writing that I read to you. It's kind of a Sankofa story. It's a history that has been hidden and forgotten, but one which should be brought forward into the light so it can inform more of our actions today. Because she tells a story in which blacks and whites once stood shoulder to shoulder against oppression. Once upon a time in earliest America, black and white workers lived and worked together, and if there was any tension between them, it was just typical of the things that happen between co-workers in the human species, in families. And believe it or not, it really didn't have a lot to do with color. So Thandeka tells a story of how not race, but class was the important divider in society at one time. And in the formative days of our nation, white upper-class land and factory owners started to pass those laws that used race as a tool to drive a wedge between white and black workers. And so we now know that they despised white indentured servants as a subset of humanity, as a lower order of being, lacking intelligence and the capacity to lead. Blacks likewise were considered uncivilized and were valuable for their labor and looked down upon as human beings. Because until 1660, the majority of labor on Virginia tobacco plantations were underfed, poorly housed and clothed indentured white servants. So it was in the 1700s that slavery began to be the preferred form for obtaining labor. So she writes again that as the slave population began to increase, the tobacco planters, the landed gentry, and the English appointed governors had to generate laws that gave privileges to the white ex-bondsmen that they feared and despised as a way of securing their loyalty and causing them to feel superior to their black workers. So that was learning to be white. In 1723, Negroes in Virginia who had been free to vote lost that right, lost the right to bear arms and to bear witness, and thus law by diabolical law, what began as a classist ploy by the 1% of that day, transmuted into a lower class psychological need for racial separation. And that racism grew and became more horrible as time went on, and the camaraderie and understanding that had formerly existed between people of different colors who had similar circumstances and status began to disappear. And so I told you, as when I look back at my own ancestry, I can find some of those poor white immigrants, some of those manual laborers. And it explains a lot about why I have struggled with things like self-worth and wealth. And it also explains to me why I have always felt an affinity for the oppressed minorities, for the poor, for the underdog. And if we look back, and if we look deep, like the Sankofa process asks us to do, we can see that in many ways we were taught to be white, those of us who are. We were asked to buy into a storyline which served the interest of a few. And in the deepest sense, we have always been aligned in the human struggle. Who were we before we became what we are now? It's not too late to remember who you've always been. So we can claim our history as Alex Perez did in discovering his Karankawa background, as I did, as Black Americans have done. Because our true inheritance is not one of hatred and separation. It's a way of being in which we are connected to ourselves, to who we are, and to each other. It's a way of being in which we are rich in compassion and friendship. It's a way of being in which the spirit of life makes us eternal allies in solidarity for our common future. So let's not forget, and let's not fail to take that wisdom forward. So as we close, if you feel called to say the names of people or things that you can remember that have informed the strength that you feel today, call that out, share that in this space. Names said and unsaid, ancestors, we see you, we thank you. Amen.
And singing our closing hymn, number 354, We Laugh, We Cry.
We need to feel the
We've now arrived at the part of the service where we must extinguish our chalice. I invite David to come forward and do that for us. This flame has served as a reminder to us that our time together this morning is sacred and a time set apart. The chalice is now extinguished, but its light lives on in the minds and hearts and souls of each one of you. And now let us hear the benediction from the words of poet John O'Donohue. When you travel, a new silence goes with you, and if you listen, you will hear what your heart would love to say. A journey can become a sacred thing. Make sure to take the time to bless your going forth, so the compass of your soul might direct you toward the territories of the Spirit. May you travel safely, arrive refreshed, and live your time away to the fullest, return home more enriched and free, to balance the gift of days which call you. Amen and blessed be.
We're so grateful for your presence this morning. For those of you who have joined us on YouTube, after the postlude, we'll be ending our live streaming service. Thank you to all online attendees. We look forward to hosting you again soon. And please don't forget to turn in your surveys.